January 1770. It will hardly be credited that in the midst of summer such a gale of wind as we have had could have happened. Fortunately, at this time we were a good distance from land. Otherwise, it would have proved fatal to us.
Ready to join? Tell us when.
For a week since Christmas, the Endeavour had been blasted by hurricane-strength winds off the top of the country. Conditions are just a little gentler for us. Ranui's skipper, Richard Allen, is taking us down the Northland west coast and into the Kaipara Harbour, across one of the most dangerous harbour bars in the country. And Richard's never done it before. Cook was determined to continue charting, but was very cautious, and he wrote, "The great sea which the prevailing westerly winds impel upon the shore must render this a very dangerous coast." He called it the desert coast, and almost got too close. At what he named False Bay, only a lucky change of wind blew the Endeavour back out to sea.
This rather desolate, heavily duned area is the very northern approaches to the Kaipara Bar Harbour. It's known as the graveyard for a very good reason. Underneath all these dunes and under the shifting sands are the wrecks of over 55 ships and vessels. After a big blow, the dunes shift and the spars, the rigging, and even bits of hull pop up out of the sand. The bones, if you will, of the graveyard.
We don't want to end up like the Kuthona, so we've enlisted a skipper with local knowledge. Avon Curl at the wheel of the schooner Te Aroha will guide us across the Kaipara Bar.
Te Aroha, Ranui, yeah, Richard here, Alan, over.
Hey Richard, just give you some insights marks to look for when you're coming out. Look on your immediately port side here, you see a tree line that's on the horizon. Quite a distinctive gap in the trees. Stay parallel with that. Typical of us west coast here, we've got very few marks to work off. And of course here, no navigational aids, so it's pretty much go by braille. Alright, we'll turn to port here and I'll make our way in. And just keep on my tail, Evan.
Roger that, Te Aroha. Looking great out there, man.
The only safe way into the Kaipara is down the northern channel through a gap in the huge sandbar. We're aiming for Potu Point, just inside the heads, the site of the original pilot station. Even on a good day, the sea state here is churning like a gigantic washing machine.
What you've got here is a bar that basically runs about 5 miles north, towards the north, from the actual Kaipara Harbour entrance. So we're running down the inside of that bar.
Although we have excellent conditions today, I can appreciate that this shallow water, with its strong ocean swell, could stand up quite a bit, and the waves make it very difficult to spot the gap in the bar. Tumari, the mouth of the Kaipara Harbour, is well known as a lair for tanifar, the personification of dangerous natural phenomena. The tanifar that lurks in these troubled waters is known as poko poko. The Kaipara is one of the largest harbours in the southern hemisphere, with a shoreline snaking nearly 3,000 kilometres. Sailing ships have been taking their chances getting in here long before the 1850s, when a pilot was appointed to bring vessels in safely.
It's a good day at the office out here today.
I admire you. I don't know how you do it for a living.
From the 1880s to the early 1900s, Kaipara was one of the country's busiest ports, exporting kauri timber and gum around the country and overseas. But by about 1914, the kauri was gone, and with no other industries to take the place of timber, the port dwindled and died. It closed in 1947.
You got a tied off that end? Hey mate. Hello Peter. How are you? Good, good. Welcome. Welcome to the Kaipara. Come aboard? Yeah, by all means.
Thanks mate. Okay Pete, so you can all the best. For a while?
Yep. Built from a single kauri log, the Te Aroha is one of the last of the mosquito fleet, solid wooden ships that service river settlements and ports around the country. She's taking me down the rest of the west coast, across Cook Strait and into the Marlborough Sounds. But first, we have to clear the Kaipara Bar. If conditions were any worse, skipper Avon Curl wouldn't attempt it.
Okay, we're about to start heading over the Copra Bar. Flying a bit, about 15 to 20 knots. Sea's starting to lump up a little bit. Quite grey and blowy. Should be a bit of fun.
Avon must read the waves to find the gap in the bar. Fortunately, it's something his family's been doing here for generations.
My grandfather, my father, most of our family have been involved with the harbour in various forms and shapes. Yes.
So if we're going to cross the bar, you're the guy to do it with, right?
Yeah, well, you're going to do that today, yeah.
I can see up ahead there's some sort of like, how shall I say, breakers arriving.
Yeah, what you're looking at up there, of course, is the shoals. It becomes a little scary, particularly if you don't know where to go. You think, gosh, there's all these white waves and white caps and breakers out there, but there's a gap out there.
A couple of cable lengths ahead of us. I suppose that's, what, about 400 metres, 400 yards. There's clear water. All this huge swell starts to soften off and we're nearly through the bar. So, quite exciting. Here we go, here's a biggie.
Somehow I don't think I'll be smiling all the way. This is one of the longest legs of my journey, and the weather's already packing in. The Endeavour sailed down here in fair winds and high spirits. I wish I could say the same. I'm not sick, but it is bouncy. She's rolling through an arc of about 60 to 70 degrees, and the single-ply Cody hull is acting like a drum. Each smack into a wave sends rivulets cascading down the wall and into my bed. Why am I doing this again? Still, we're moving forward.
I think we've just spent one of the most uncomfortable nights ever. The captain described it as having 10 winks about 4 o'clock. After we came off the bar, it got really, really rough. Nobody's slept at all, I don't think. We've had, I would say, 12 hours of fairly intense weather. It's calmed down now to the point where we're only bouncing. So I'm just going to try and have a shave now because it's not easy. I'll take advantage of the slightly calmer sea conditions. Right. Anyway, after 12 hours steaming, here we are. We've made it all the way from the Copra to the Manukau Heads.
At this rate, it's going to be a very long trip, battling our way down the Waikato and Taranaki coast to New Plymouth, where we stop for fuel. Schooners like the Te Aroha had an average life expectancy of only about 30 years, so at 92, she's doing pretty well.
So, what's she like to sail?
Well, in her early days, when she was carrying a payload, I'd say she would have been a lovely, graceful old lady because she was licensed to carry just on 150 tonne. Now, you put 150 tonne in a boat, she pushes down in the water. Naturally, in an ocean swell, she would sit there like a big duck and just go up and down. Of course, today, as she's fitted out for passenger work, she's a lot lighter and she tends to feel the waves perhaps a little more than what she would have done. They keep you on the ball all the time. None of this plastic fantastic rubbish. She's all good old New Zealand carrier, this boat.
Unlike the East Coast, no waka came out to see the Endeavour down here. There was no trading for fish. They had to catch their own.
Terrible job, this. You'll have to excuse my trousers. They got covered in fish blood before, so like all good sailors, you've got to do your own laundry. Now, when Cook sailed down here, he noted this mountain out here, and he called it Woody Head. And it marks the southern entrance to Raglan Harbour. We're going straight on past it, down to New Plymouth. We should be there, we were scheduled to be there about 8 o'clock, but because of this southerly pounding in, we're not going to be there till after midnight. Yay.
The Endeavour's crew often shot seabirds for food. They'd have had a field day here.
Cook named this barren and windswept little island Gannet Rock for obvious reasons. He should probably have called it Pungent Rock. The smell is intense.
Travelling by sea, and in a grand old lady such as this, means that it takes, well, as long as it takes. Various wits have described being at sea as 90% boredom and 10% terror, but they forgot to mention the mitigating joys of fresh raw tuna with soy and wasabi, whilst perusing the glossy pages for my own 36-foot dream sloop. Although the land appeared fertile, Cook and his crew saw little signs of life along the coast, the odd fire, a few houses. One thing, however, did stand out.
Cook noted in his log that he could see the base of what he took to be a very high mountain, but he was only given tantalising glimpses of it for the next few days. And then finally at 5 a.m. on Saturday, it cleared enough for him to see Mount Taranaki, or as he named it, Mount Egmont. It was during a thunderstorm, and he got the whole picture. And even Banks was moved to note, certainly it is the noblest hill I have ever seen.
Banks also wrote that he saw many white lumps on the mountain in groups of 50 or 60. They were probably a type of moss, but Banks thought they looked like flocks of sheep. Fairly prophetic, I guess. So far on my voyage, I've been on relatively short trips, but this is a long haul, and in an old wooden flat-bottom sailing ship, just like the Endeavour and not that much smaller. By this stage of their journey, they hadn't been ashore since the Bay of Islands 5 weeks earlier. I'm looking forward to stretching my legs in New Plymouth, but Cook and his crew didn't have that option. There was no harbour there in 1770.
We came in here about 4 o'clock in the morning and berthed alongside. Most of us had the first decent night's sleep, 4 hours worth, that we've had in the last couple of days, so we're feeling a little bit fresher. We're just fueling up at the moment, and then we're going to head down south to Queen Charlotte Sound. Should take us a couple of days. When they first used to bring passenger ships and cargo ships in here, unloading was a very dangerous process. This is an extraordinarily exposed piece of coastline. But after they built this big long breakwater here and created their own harbour, things became a lot safer. And that way they created their own port.
As the Endeavour sailed south of Cape Egmont, Cook wrote the ship was in a very broad or deep bay, the same bay that had been charted by Abel Tasman. Cook said the land on the southern side was of considerable height and he hoped to find safe harbour, but first he had to get across there. And so do we. Of course we know that it's not a bay. The coastline tapers down to a strait, one of the most dangerous and therefore respected passages of water in New Zealand. It's beginning to lump up out there. It's very confused. Waves are coming at us from 3 different directions. There's no wind to speak of, which is a pity, because full sails would have had a stabilizing effect on the ship. Sleep? Yeah, right.
Cook was still following Tasman's chart, which showed this whole coastline as part of a deep bay, and he could see down here to the south that there was clear water, safe harbour and anchorage, and it's what he really needed to clean his hull. He hadn't been able to do it for about 2 months. It was encrusted with seaweed and barnacles, and he'd also encountered some damage to the ship when he'd come through the tempests around North Cape, and he urgently needed to make repairs. And when he saw this, he thought it was perfect, and he headed right in here.
There was a real current running, forcing Cook to tack back and forth to get in. But it was worth it.
And here it is, exactly what he needed. In his own words, a very snug cove. It had fresh water, plenty of wood, and heaps of fish. They caught 300 pounds straight away. But more importantly, Cook had a perfect beach for careening his vessel. He called it Ship Cove, and he'd come here a total of 5 times in his 3 voyages to this part of the world. It's an idyllic spot and a safe anchorage, and just charming, just charming.
Well done, Aotearoa. Thank you. We got here. Now to explore. Unlike many memorials to James Cook in New Zealand, it's hard to miss the one at Ship Cove. This haven, with its abundant natural resources, offered Cook everything he needed for his crew and for his ship, which he needed to tip over and clean, or careen, as it's known.
Careening the hull of a ship the size of the Endeavour was no easy task. First they had to row the boat in up against the beach here at high tide. She was then made fast with ropes around the mast, and then these ropes were tied back into the trees in the bush, and then sailors hauled on them until she tipped over and the whole side of the ship was exposed. They then cleaned it off, and then it was tipped back up again and floated off again at high tide. They took it out into the bay, rotated the ship around, and then rowed it back on again and did the same thing over again. It was a long, arduous, difficult process.
The Maori knew this area as Tautoranui. Cook said the people here were poor and constantly on guard against raiding parties. On a beach near Ship Cove, Cook was handed a gnawed human forearm by a Maori who said it was a recently killed enemy. The Europeans were horrified by the first proof of something they had long suspected. Cook was not convinced that Tasman's chart was accurate. If there was a wide, deep bay between here and Cape Egmont, why did there seem to be a gap in the coastline at the bottom? And what about the vicious currents? Where did they come from? To find out, Cook took the pinnace and rowed southeast up the Sound, but it was hard going against the wind, and he landed on Aotearoa Island.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Captain's log, 23rd January 1770. I took one hand with me and climbed up to the top of one of the hills. I was abundantly recompensed for the trouble I had in ascending the hill.
Well, I hope that's true, James. It's a fair climb in the midday sun. For some reason, I can't help thinking about mad dogs and Englishmen, and television presenters. The hill was heavily wooded, and Cook had to climb for some time to get the view he wanted. Fantastic. Well, it's up here somewhere, they tell me. But God knows where. Seems to have been forgotten.
Here it is. The world's hardest to find Cook Memorial. When Cook came here and climbed all the way up this hill, he made one of the most important discoveries of his entire trip. He could see the Eastern Sea, and from it a passage of water through here to the Western Sea. So he was almost certain that the charting that he'd done for the last 3.5 months was in fact around an island. This discovery was so momentous that Banks insisted on calling this passage of water Cook Strait.
Cook came down the hill in high spirits. His discovery meant he could now escape the dangerous west coast and return to the much more sheltered eastern side. But first, he wanted to talk some more with the local Māori. Just across from Ship and Cannibals Coves, Cook and company visited Pa on the island of Motuara. Banks says they were welcomed with much confidence and civility, and reports a brisk trade in human bones and skulls. Today, Motuara is a bird sanctuary. That's fitting because Banks described the dawn chorus in this area as certainly the most melodious wild music I have ever heard. There's a memorial cairn on top of the island, marking another Cook milestone.
Cook had with him a wooden post on which was carved Endeavour, January 1770. He'd already erected a similar post and raised the Union Jack across the way at Ship Cove. But it was here that he took formal possession of the mainland in the name of King George III, and he named the Sound in honour of his wife, Queen Charlotte.
Cook wanted the flagpole and monument to show other Europeans he was here first. The Maori told him they'd never take them down.
Cook sat down at the top here with an old man from the Pa, with the Tahitian priest Tupaya interpreting for them. There's been a lot of discussion about what was said, but basically the old man confirmed for Cook that the strait separated two islands. Cook resolved to sail down through the straits, head south and chart the second island. What a view.
Among the first Europeans to arrive here in Cook's wake were whalers. The first whaling station was built in Tory Channel in 1829, and nearby the Purano station operated from 1911 until the mid-1960s. The Te Aroha was a frequent visitor, picking up oil and meat from whales harpooned in Cook Strait. Purano's top gunner, Charlie Heberley, shot over 1,000 whales in his career, and his son Joe, who still lives just round the bay from the station, was introduced to whaling at a very tender age.
We see a whale now, it's a mighty creature, but it was different in those days.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you were the youngest harpooner or gunner ever to set foot on a boat, weren't you?
Yeah, I went straight out of school at 16 and shot my first whale, and it was a great thrill.
Was that with your dad?
Yep.
With Charlie?
Yeah.
Wow.
From the time on the lookout when the whale was first spotted, running down the lookout with your lunch tin under you, I can probably relate it to an All Black going onto a test match. The whale would sound for 10 minutes and come up, and you had to guess basically where he was going to come up. The whales got pretty stirred up, like a mad bull in a paddock sort of thing, and kick you. Right. And so they'd lash out. The tail only just need to touch the boat and there would be a hole on it. It was pretty dangerous. You were using explosives and guns that had no recoil system. Dad's joint there was probably twice the size of a normal person because it had been broken that many times from the kickback of the gun. This is where the whales came up here, tail first, and right up onto the deck. And it was stripped of the blubber, so the winches would pull the blubber off. There was blood and guts and oil, and everything was slippery, and everything you touched was covered in blood and oil. And you wear gumboots and you had spikes in your heels because it was so slippery.
So it's a gore fest, really.
Oh, it was, but, you know, there was dollars in it.
Nowadays, the old Purano works are preserved and managed by the Department of Conservation.
So why did the station close down here?
Well, basically, the Japs and the Russians got stuck into the Antarctic when they weren't supposed to be, and the figures here went from 250 down to 55 down to 8. They just basically slaughtered them. But now we can see them coming back. We probably see 20 or 30 whales in a season.
You see them out here in the
yeah. So it's great, you know, it's great to see them coming back.
It's time to say farewell and fair sailing to the Te Aroha. My journey around the South Island is about to begin after one more crossing of Cook Strait. After my last crossing of Cook Strait, I'd kind of appreciate a quick, smooth trip, which is what Transrail's fast ferry the Lynx promises.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your Captain John Clark. Welcome on board the Lynx for this service to Wellington.
Less than 2 hours across the strait in normal conditions, but even when it's rough, it's a comfortable ride thanks to the wave-piercing twin-hull design and the high-tech stabilizing system which reacts to the changing sea states. And there's plenty of grunt under the hood. Jet engines.
Oh wow, look at this.
Okay, what do you think of the beast?
It's huge, isn't it?
Yeah, well,
we've got 2 of them.
4 of these, well, 2 in each side, and V20 Rustons, British engine, plenty of power to get the speed. The ship does up to 40 knots.
How's the noise quotient at that level?
The noise down here at full chat, it's unbearable without ear muffs.
And if the noise doesn't get you, the heat certainly will. It's 42 degrees in here.
I'll get those fans on pretty soon, I think.
Oh, yes.
Cool it down.
We're all set to go. But there's unexpected action off the bow. A local yachting club has just started a race. Now motor gives way to sail, except above 500 tons. And we're a bit more than that. But with this much sheer power, we can afford to be gallant.
making too much way at all, this guy, doesn't he?
No, it's not good waiting for him. It'll be another 20 minutes.
With the path ahead finally clear, the Lynx glides on. In a way, it's as dramatic a sight as the Endeavour would have been here. So different, so new, almost an alien presence. For Captain John Clark, command of this vessel in these waters is a world away from his beginnings in the shipping business.
I've been at sea all my life.
So where did you start originally?
Oh, on the North Atlantic.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Pretty tough run. Pretty tough
I'll
run.
tell you what, you think Cook Strait's bad, but out the North Atlantic for 4 years,
Yeah.
in the middle of winter.
The entrance to Tory Channel marks the end of our leisurely cruise through the Marlborough Sounds. It's time to wind those jet engines up and put the hammer down. For many New Zealanders, the Cook Strait ferries will always be linked with one fateful day, April 10th, 1968.
Tragedy today in Wellington Harbour. The inter-island ferry Wahine foundered off Port Dorset with 744 passengers and crew aboard. There's been serious loss of life, but exact details are not yet available. It's known at least 40 are dead, but this figure could be much higher.
Nearly 700 people were rescued, but 51 lost their lives.
I think this area was where the Wahine ended up.
Yeah, this is quite shallow in here.
Yeah, this comes down to 11.2 metres, and then the harbour goes deeper down to 24, 25 metres. So this is almost like a bar harbour, and you notice it in southerly conditions because the seas really pick up at that point.
Right.
With the Wellington ferry terminal in sight, Captain Clark prepares to dock, using TV monitors and a joystick.
So what can you see on the cameras?
Well, you see we're clear of the trawler on that side.
Right.
See the other ship and the berth coming up on this side, and I can see the line of the berth on this centre camera. You can be quite gentle with this, even though you've got a lot of power at your fingertips.
3 metres, you guys, good.
Like a wise sailor once said, you can never dock too slowly. But with the gangplank automatically in place and the links all tied up, it's time for me to say my goodbyes and head ashore. After so much time recently on boats in isolated places, the buzz of a city at night is slightly unnerving. I've got the morning spare before my next ship leaves, so I walk, swaying ever so slightly, down Lambton Quay, the heart of Wellington's business district. As its name implies, where there are now buses and cars and buildings, there was once water, wharves and ships. The Port of Wellington has seen massive changes over the years. It's even been shifted, and that's allowed the waterfront to be opened up to the public. Pride of place goes to our place, Te Papa, the Museum of New Zealand. I'm here to see something, or should I say someone, intrinsic to my whole voyage. The least I can do is pay my respects before I leave for my South Island circumnavigation. It's not that easy though, and I have to thank Te Papa for indulging my strange request. Exhibiting space at the museum is at a premium, and nowhere near everything can be shown at once. Even the most important works have to spend some time locked away in the vaults. Out of sight, but definitely not forgotten.
Here we are.
Oh, wow.
There's the painting and sculpture store. Okay, well, that's around this way. We keep most of our artworks in these painting cradles. Have you come around to this side?
Sure.
It's in here.
This original painting of James Cook is one of only 5 surviving portraits of the great man done in the 18th century.
There you go.
It was painted in 1776 by John Webber, who was ship's artist aboard the Resolution during Cook's third and final Pacific voyage. It's a tribute to a master mariner, navigator, astronomer, cartographer, hydrographer. It's a picture of a cool, level-headed man who's driven and determined, a leader of men, and an inspiration to generations of sailors. My next lift is the Spirit of Competition, owned by Pacifica Shipping, one of New Zealand's last surviving coastal shipping companies. She's taking me from Wellington, back across Cook Strait, down the Kaikoura coast, past Christchurch and into Lyttelton Harbour. At the entrance to Wellington Harbour, we pass Pencato Heads, where the first permanent lighthouse in New Zealand was opened in 1859. It was run by Mary Jane Bennett, the first and only woman lighthouse keeper in the country. Unfortunately, the light was so often obscured in bad weather, in 1935 it was completely replaced by a low-level light beneath it, at Bering Head. Cook stayed well off this dangerous exposed coast, and made to sail south until some of his officers pressured him to head north.
The officers believed that there was still a chance, just a chance, that the North Island was attached to the great southern continent that they'd been looking for. Cook was sceptical about it and disagreed, but to keep Banks and other members happy, he headed up north around the coastline until he saw the coast at Cape Turn again. At that point they realised that the North Island was in fact just that, an island. He turned and headed south.
It's a magnificent sunset. The smell of the sea is strong and warm, and the North Island leg is behind us. Every sailor I've met with so far has been open and welcoming, and I'm beginning to glimpse the camaraderie of the sea. Maybe the acknowledgement that the ocean has a far greater power than ourselves gives mariners humility, or at the least humanity. Of course, all this could probably just be my lack of sleep.
Captain's log, 17th February 1770. The land is of very broken, uneven surface and hath more the appearance of barrenness than fertility. Last night we saw smoke up it, and this morning some people, and therefore it must be inhabited.
When Cook and his crew sailed down here, Cook made one of his very few mistakes. The land out here that we can see, he called Banks Island. And the land of Christchurch adjoining it is so flat, it's really easy to miss. Now he was standing a lot further out, 5, 10, 15 miles maybe than we are, and so of course never spotted it. It appeared like an island to him, and I guess it was maybe a case of tit for tat. Banks had insisted that Cook Strait was named after Cook. Cook now insisted that Banks Island was named after Banks. So do you have a personal relationship with the sea itself, do you think?
No. It's the only job I've ever had.
Right.
In terms of, you hear seafarers talking about they can't give up going to sea because they miss the smell of the salt. I'm afraid of it. Yeah. It's dangerous. I mean, it's a dangerous job.
Yeah.
But it's exciting.
Yeah.
I enjoy the job. I'm good at the job.
Yeah.
Highly trained and things like that. But no. I don't think I'll miss it should I give up. I like going to the beach. I like going for a swim. But I won't miss it.
Okay.
Ah, Lyttelton. My home port and a harbour on which I've done a little sailing. Just over the Port Hills is Mount Pleasant, in the estuary where I first learned to sail in my brother Michael's P-class. The waters around Banks Peninsula make for vigorous sailing, with the notorious southerly often making a sudden appearance. Something we know a little bit about, having been aboard a yacht dismasted in the Boxing Day race off Akaroa Head some years back. No chance of that aboard this ship though. Nor on the ship that's taking me southwards soon. The Kakariki is moored just in front of us. Lord, she's a big puppy. Lyttelton has been one of New Zealand's busiest ports since 1850, when 4 ships from the Canterbury Company arrived to start the first organised European settlement of the country.
When I was a boy, 35 odd years ago, my dad used to bring me down here with a little thread line to fish for herrings off the wharf. I don't think you'd do it these days. Anyway, in 1850, December of 1850, 4 ships sailed in here, the Charlotte Jane, the Cressy, the Randolph and the George Seymour. And on board were nearly 800 people who became known as the Canterbury Pilgrims. And if your ancestors were on board one of those first 4 ships, in Canterbury circles, it's a bit of kudos. Mine, of course, weren't. But never mind. These 800 odd people settled here in Christchurch. They went up over the bridle path and established the city itself. And this rock here commemorates their arrival, Pilgrim's Rock. It was pretty much at this spot that the jetty was, and they first came ashore.
Lyttelton continued as a major immigration port. Upgrading allowed it to handle the so-called home boats, huge passenger cargo liners linking Britain to her dominion. The Lyttelton to Wellington overnight ferry service ran for 81 years, and although it's mainly a cargo port these days, cruise liner visits are increasing. Part of the port for 94 years, and still going strong, is the tug Lyttelton. Retired from active service in 1970, but saved by a group of enthusiasts who formed the Tug Lyttelton Preservation Society.
So she's a beautiful old girl. She's been around for a while.
Yes, since 1907. She's about 4 years older than the Titanic, but she's in far better condition.
Considerably better condition.
Considerably, yes. But the vessel has seen so much, movements in and out of port, the troop ships in both World Wars, Scott's vessel, Shackleton's Endurance. During the war, it was also the examination vessel, one of the examination vessels.
When you say examination, what was that for?
All foreign going ships had to stop and have their papers examined. If they didn't stop, they would be fired upon by Battery Point back there. In fact, my father was examination officer, and 2 days before bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941, he was coming off a Russian ship.
Yeah.
And he slipped and fell between and was crushed and actually died on this vessel.
Oh.
When I was about 11.
A bit of a sad story, mate.
Yes,
Sorry,
that's all part of history.
Most of the tug's volunteers are retired sailors who clearly love this old girl. She's kept in immaculate condition, and listen to the throb of the steam engines, so different from the drone of diesels. The engines have a capacity of 1,000 horsepower and run like clockwork. There's a lot of professional pride still at stake on this boat. A crew of at least 13 willing volunteers is needed to run the tug each time it goes out. And with the engines getting through up to 600 kilos of coal an hour, there's plenty of hard work for the stokers. Another trip to the chiropractor coming up.
How much is one of these hold?
About a kilo, 5 to 10 kilos.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, so you don't have to work absolutely flat out all the time then?
No. It depends on the engine room start.
As much a part of Lyttelton Harbour as the extraordinary light on the Port Hills, the tug has seen many changes. The demise of sailing ships and the arrival of containerisation. And it's nice that her long, loyal service has been respected and recognised in her restoration. A living and constant reminder of Lyttelton's rich maritime history. Well, that was a wonderful, nostalgic trip. But now it's back to the real world. My next ship is leaving the Lyttelton Oil Terminal. Tradition dictates that New Zealand coastal tankers are named after native birds, so this is the kakariki, the parakeet. It's also the largest New Zealand registered vessel, and to a casual observer such as myself, a gigantic tank full of high explosives.
G'day, Peter.
Hi, Mike.
Mike Webb.
How do you do?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, great.
Oh, welcome on board.
Thanks, mate.
Just in time to see us launch our lifeboat off the stern, if you're interested.
Test the lifeboat.
Yeah.
Me.
You. Don't worry, we'll look after you. We haven't killed anybody yet.
Okay.
Okay? Come with me. Okay, well this is the lifeboat I was telling you about, the free-fall lifeboat. We're going to climb in here.
Right.
And we're going to launch it into space. And what I want you to do is get into the coxswain seat. When we get into the coxswain seat, we'll run through the procedures. You start the engine, you pull the lever, and we will free fall into the water. It'll take about 9 seconds.
Just coxswain, you want me to drive it?
I want you to drive it.
Oh, mate, thanks very much.
Okay, we'll get in.
Okay.
You first.
Right.
You can probably tell I'm just a bit on the nervous side. Engine running, yep. Headband on. Steering wheel goes round and round, yep. Okay.
Hey, you got the hang of that, have you? Yeah, pull that back. Flick it back to flat, pump this up and down. Flick it as we start to roll.
Oh yeah, brave words, mate.
Pump the handle. Go.
And away we go. Pumping, 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 pumping.
Is the lever right over?
Pumping, pumping. Whoop. Captain Mike Webb has another surprise in store for me. Under the watchful eye of New Zealand's only female harbour pilot, Joanne Stanley, and the rest of the bridge crew, I've been given the wheel.
Midships.
Midships. Midships. This is very freaky. I'm running a boat with 48,000 tonnes of the fuel oil on board. I'm going straight towards another boat coming down the harbour towards us. Nothing to worry about. Huh? Oh, sorry.
Starboard 5.
Starboard 5.
North Cape to Littleton. Quite a trip. But James Cook and I still have a long way to go. Him still searching for the great southern continent. Me hitching rides on different vessels to complete my own circumnavigation of New Zealand. And soon to come are the fabled waters of Fovo Strait, Pusiga Point, the southern fjords, and the west coast. There's no shelter from the winds and waves coming uninterrupted straight from the frozen Antarctic. Oh boy.